Pennsylvania. My dad was a great, let me see, I don't use this superlatives there, but a very good provider. My mother was a very good preparer. I grew up with food on the table, clothes on my back, shelter over my head. I grew up for the awful lot of things. I grew up with a huge backyard we can play in. It was a safe area that my parents provided for us. I did not want, except maybe when the Christmas Sears wish book came along. Now, some of you don't know what that is, but anyway, I did not want because my parents were very good at that. But today we're going to look at the great shepherd, the one who really provides for us. So we're going to look at Psalm 23. So I'll read it for you real quick here. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. He makes me lie down in green pastures. He leads me beside still waters. He restores my soul. He leads me in paths of righteousness for his name's sake. Even though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I fear no evil. For you are with me, your rod and your staff, they comfort me. You prepare a table before me in the presence of my enemies. You anoint my head with oil. My cup overflows. Surely goodness and mercy shall follow me all the days of my life, and I shall dwell in the house of the Lord forever. Now here, David, the author of Psalms, himself a shepherd, the son of a shepherd, later to be known as the shepherd king of Israel, stated explicitly, the Lord is my shepherd. To whom was he referring to? He's referring to Jehovah, the Lord of God of Israel. We can relate 7 different names of Jehovah in the Psalms. The first one I was going to look at is Jehovah Rohi. The Lord is my shepherd. David thought about God, the God of Israel, as he thought about his relationship with God. He made the analogy of a shepherd and his sheep. God was like a shepherd to David, and David was like a sheep to God. Sheep do not just take care of themselves, as some might suppose. They require more than any other class of livestock, endless attention and meticulous care. The entire psalm goes on to recount the manner in which the good shepherd spares no pains for the welfare of his sheep. It is a familiar idea throughout the Bible that the Lord is a shepherd to his people. The idea begins as early as the book of Genesis, where Jacob recalled the Lord, the shepherd, the stone of Israel, Genesis 49:24. 1 Peter 5:4 calls Jesus the chief shepherd. It's remarkable that the Lord would call himself our shepherd. In Israel, as in other ancient societies, a shepherd's work was considered the lowest of all jobs. If a family needed a shepherd, it was always the youngest son, like David. Jehovah has chosen to be our shepherd. David says the great God of the universe has stooped to take just such care of you and me. David knew this in a personal sense. He says, my shepherd. It was not just that the Lord was a shepherd for others. He was a real personal shepherd for David himself. Charles Spurgeon says, the sweetest word of the whole is the monosyllable, my. He does not say the Lord is shepherd of the whole world at large and leads forth multitude as his flock, but the Lord is my shepherd. If he is a shepherd to no one else, he is a shepherd to me. He cares for me, watches over me, and preserves me. Overwhelmingly, the idea behind God's role as shepherd is of loving care and concern. David found comfort and security in the thought that God cared for him like a shepherd cares for his sheep. Spurgeon also says that before a man can truly say, the Lord is my shepherd, he must first feel himself to be a sheep by nature, for he cannot know that God is his shepherd unless he feels in himself that he has the nature of a sheep. He must relate to a sheep as its foolishness, its dependency, and in the warped nature of its will. The Greek philosopher Aristotle says that a sheep is a foolish and sluggish creature, most prone to wander, though it feels no want and unlikely to return. A sheep can make no shift to save itself from trouble or peril. There it stands and will perish if not driven away by the shepherd. I shall not want. Since the Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. Actually, the word want, as used here, has a broader meaning than might first be imagined. No doubt the main concept is that of not lacking, not deficient in proper care, management, or husbandry. But our second emphasis is the idea of being completely contented in the Good Shepherd's care and consequently not craving or desiring anything more. For David, the fact of God's shepherd-like care was the end of a dissatisfied need. He said, I shall not want, both as a declaration and as a decision. I shall not want means all my needs are supplied by the Lord my shepherd. I shall not want means I decide not to not desire more than the Lord my shepherd gives. The second name of God that we can relate to in this passage is Jehovah Shalom, the Lord my peace. He makes me lie down. The Lord as a shepherd knew how to make David rest when he needed it. Just as a literal shepherd would care for his sheep, the implication is that a sheep does not always know what it needs and what is best for itself. So it needs help from the shepherd. He makes it lie down in green pastures. The shepherd also knew the good places to make the sheep rest. He faithfully guides his sheep to green pastures. Philip Keller, in A Shepherd Looks at Psalm 23, writes, the strange thing about sheep is that because of their very makeup, it is almost impossible for them to be made to lie down unless 4 requirements are met. Owing to their timidity, they refuse to lie down unless they feel free of all fear. Because of social behavior within a flock, sheep will not lie down unless they are free from friction with others of their kind. If tormented by flies or parasites, sheep will not lie down. Only when free from these pests can they relax. Lastly, sheep will not lie down as long as they feel in need of finding food. They must be free from hunger. Rest comes because the shepherd has dealt with fear, friction, flies, and famine. I lie down and sleep in peace. For you alone, O Lord, make me dwell in safety. Psalms 4:8. It is not generally recognized that many of the great sheep countries of the world are dry, semi-arid areas. Most breeds of sheep flourish best in this sort of terrain. They are susceptible to fewer hazards of health or parasites where the climate is dry. But in those same regions, it is neither natural nor common to find green pastures. For example, Palestine, where David wrote the psalm and kept his father's flocks, especially near Bethlehem, it is dry, brown, sunburned wasteland. Green pastures did not just happen by chance. Green pastures were a product of tremendous labor and time and skill in land use. Green pastures were the result of cleaning rough, rocky land, of tearing down brush and roots and stumps, of deep plowing and careful soil preparation, of seeding and planting special grains and legumes, of irrigating with water and husbanding with care the crops forage that would feed the flocks. All this represented tremendous toil and skill and time for the careful shepherd. If his sheep were to enjoy green pastures amid the brown, barren hills, it meant he had a tremendous job to do. He leads me by still waters. The shepherd knows when the sheep needs green pastures and when the sheep needs still waters. The images are rich with a sense of comfort, care, and rest. When sheep are thirsty, they become restless and set out in search of water. If not led to the good water supplies of clean, pure water, they will often end up drinking from the polluted potholes where they pick up internal parasites and diseases. And in precisely the same manner, Christ, our good shepherd, made it clear that thirsty souls of men and women can only be fully satisfied when their capacity and thirst for spiritual life is fully quenched by drawing on himself. In Matthew 5:6, he said, "Blessed are those who hunger and thirst for righteousness, for they will be filled," satisfied. Most people are not aware that sheep can go for months on end without drinking, especially if the weather is not too hot, without actually drinking. If there is heavy dew in the grass each morning, sheep by habit rise just before dawn and start to feed. Or if there is bright moonlight, they will graze at night. The early hours are when the vegetation is drenched with dew, and sheep can fill on the amount of water taken in with their forage as they graze before and after dawn. In our Christian life, it is more than passing significance to observe that those who are often the most serene, most confident, and most able to cope with life's complexities are those who rise early each day. It is in this quiet early hours of the morning that they are led beside the quiet, still waters where they can take in the very life of Christ for the day. This is much more than mere figure of speech. It is practical reality. The biographies of the great men and women of God repeatedly point out how the secret of the success of their spiritual life was attributed to the quiet time of each morning. There, alone, still, waiting for the Master's voice, one is led gently to the place where, as the old hymn puts it, the still dew of his Spirit can be dropped into my life and soul. The third name of Jehovah that we can relate to here is Jehovah Rapha, the Lord my healer. He restores my soul. In studying this psalm, it must always be remembered that it is a sheep in the Good Shepherd's care who is speaking. It is essentially a Christian claim of belonging in the family of God. As such, he boasts of benefits such as relationship. This is being the case, one might well ask, why then this statement, he restores my soul? Surely it would be assumed that if anyone in the Good Shepherd's care could never become so distressed in soul as to need restoration. But the fact remains this does happen. Even David, the author of the psalm, who is much loved by God, knew what it was to be cast down and dejected. He had tasted defeat in his life and felt the frustration of having fallen under temptation. David was acquainted with the bitterness and feeling of hopelessness and without strength in himself. In Psalms 42:11, he cries out, "Why are you downcast, O my soul? Why so disturbed within me? Put your hope in God." Now there's exact parallel to this in caring for sheep. Only those intimately acquainted with sheep and their habits understand the significance of a cast sheep or a cast down sheep. This is an old English shepherd's term for a sheep that has turned over on its back and cannot get up again by itself. A cast sheep is a very pathetic sight. Lying on its back, its feet in the air, it flails away frantically, struggling to stand up without success. Sometimes it will bleat a little bit for help, but generally it lies there lashing out in fright and frustration, waiting to be rescued and to be restored. The tender care of the shepherd describes the previous verse. It has had its intended effect. David's soul was restored by the figurative green pastures and still waters the shepherd brought him to. Restores has the idea of rescue of a lost one. It may picture the straying sheep brought back. When we read the life story of Jesus Christ and examine carefully his conduct in coping with the human need, we see him again and again as the good shepherd picking up cast sheep. The tenderness, the love, the patience that he used to restore Peter's soul after his temptations is a classic picture of the Christ coming to restore one of his own. And so he comes quietly, gently, reassuringly to us, no matter when or where or how we may be cast down. Spurgeon writes, "He restoreth my soul. He restores its original purity, that it was now grown foul and black with sin. For also, what good were it to have green pastures and a black soul?" The next name we associate or relate to this passage of Jehovah is Jehovah Sidkenu. The Lord is my righteousness. He leads me. The shepherd was a guide. The sheep did not need to know where the green pastures or still waters were. All they needed to know is where the shepherd was. Likewise, the Lord would guide David to what he needed. He leads me in paths of righteousness. The leadership of the shepherd did not only discomfort and restore David, he also guides his sheep into righteousness. God's guidance to David had a moral aspect as well. George Horne writes, they are thenceforth led in the path of righteousness, in the way of a holy obedience. Obstructions are removed. They are strengthened to walk and to run in the paths of God's commandments for his name's sake. The shepherd guides the sheep with an overarching view to the credit and glory of the shepherd's own name. Adam Clarke writes, to display the glory of his grace and not account on any merit in me, God's motive of conduct towards the children of men are derived from the perfections and goodness of his own nature. The next name that we relate to this is Jehovah Shammah, the Lord my comparison. Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death. This is the first dark note in this psalm. Previously, David wrote of green pastures and still waters and paths of righteousness. Yet when following the Lord as shepherd, one may still walk through the valley of the shadow of death. David used this powerful phrase to speak of some kind of dark, fearful experience. It is an imprecise phrase, yet its poetry makes perfect sense. It is a valley, not a mountain or broad meadow. A valley suggests being hedged in or surrounded. It is a valley of the shadow of death, not facing the substance of death itself, but the shadow of death, casting its dark, fearful outline across David's path. It is a valley of the shadow of death, facing what seemed to David as the ultimate defeat in evil. David recognized that under the shepherd's leading, he may walk through the valley of the shadow of death. It is not his destination or his dwelling place. Like it says in Ecclesiastes, David may say that all his life is lived under the shadow of death, and it is the conscious presence of the Lord as shepherd that makes it bearable. This line is especially suggestive when we read this psalm with an eye toward Jesus, the great shepherd. We understand that a shadow is not tangible, but is cast by something that is. One can rightly say we face only the shadow of death because Jesus took the full reality of our death in our place. Even though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, this is the line from Psalms, and the psalm as a whole has proven itself precious to many a dying believer throughout time. They have been comforted, strengthened, and warmed by the thought that the Lord would shepherd them through the valley of the shadow of death. Near death, the believer still calmly walks. They do not need to quicken their pace in alarm or panic. Near death, the believer does not walk in the valley, but through the valley. Spurgeon says, death is in its substance has been removed, and only the shadow of it remains. Nothing is afraid of a shadow, for a shadow cannot stop a man's pathway, even for a moment. The shadow of a dog cannot bite. The shadow of a sword cannot kill. The shadow of death cannot destroy us. It has an inexpressibly delightful application to the dying, but it is for the living too. The words are not in the future tense, and therefore are not reserved for a distant moment. It is a most reassuring and reinforcing experience to a child of God to discover that there is, even in the dark valley, a source of strength and courage to be found in God. It is when we can look back over our life and see how the shepherd's hand has guided and sustained him in the darkest hours that renewed faith is engendered. Because he has led me through without fear before, he can do it again and again and again. In this knowledge, fear fades and tranquility of heart and mind takes its place. Let come what may. Storms may break me about me. Predators may attack. The rivers may threaten to inundate me. But because he is in the situation with me, I shall not fear. Despite every dark association with the idea of the valley of the shadow of death, David could resolutely say this because he was under the care of the Lord his shepherd. There are going to be some valleys in life for all of us. The Good Shepherd himself assured us of that. In his world, you will have trouble. But take heart, I have overcome the world. John 16:33. The basic question is not whether we have many or few valleys. It is not whether these valleys are dark or merely dim with shadows. The question is, how do I react to them? How do I go through them? How do I cope with the troubles that come my way? With Christ, I face them calmly. With his gracious Spirit to guide me, I face them fearlessly. We might say that the shepherd's presence did not eliminate the presence of evil, but certainly the fear of evil. For you are with me. This emphasizes that it is the presence of the shepherd that eliminated the fear of the evil for the sheep. No matter his present environment, David could look to the fact that God's shepherd-like presence and know that you are with me and I will fear no evil. Your rod and your staff, they comfort me. The rod and staff were instruments used by a shepherd. The idea of a sturdy walking stick used to gently guide the sheep and the rod to protect them from possible predators. These instruments of guidance were a comfort to David. It helped him, even in the valley of the shadow of death, to know that God guided him even through correction. It is a great comfort that God will correct us when we need it. Each shepherd boy, from the time he first starts to tend his father's flock, takes special pride in the selection of a rod and staff exactly suited to his own size and strength. He goes to the bush and selects a young sapling that is dug from the ground. This is carved and whittled down with great care and patience. The enlarged base of the sapling, where his trunk joins the roots, is shaped into a smooth, rounded head of hard wood. This is an actual rod from Kenya. And you can see this would be the tree, and this would be the ball that was the roots. It is very hard, and believe me, you don't want to be hit by it. And again, this would be similar to a staff. It looks more like a walking stick, but it is used to guide the sheep in Kenya, and it was a gentle use to guide the sheep. After he completes it, the shepherd boy spends hours practicing with his club, learning how to throw it with amazing speed and accuracy. It becomes his main weapon of defense for both himself and his sheep. In caring for his sheep, the Good Shepherd will from time to time make a careful examination of each individual sheep. The picture is a very poignant one. As each animal comes out of the corral and through the gate, it is stopped by the shepherd's outstretched rod. He opens the fleece with the rod. He runs his hands over the body. He feels for any sign of trouble. He examines the sheep with care to see that it is well. This is a most searching process entailing every intimate detail. It is, too, a comfort to the sheep, for only in this way can its hidden problems be laid bare before the shepherd. This is what is meant by Psalms 139, 23, 24, when the psalmist wrote, "Search me, O God, and know my heart. Test me and know my anxious thoughts. See if there is any offensive way in me, and lead me in the way of everlasting." It was a rod of God's word that Christ, our good shepherd, used in his own encounter with the serpent, Satan, during his desert temptation. It is the same word of God which we can count on again and again to encounter the assaults and attacks of Satan. And it matters not whether the guise he assumes is that of a subtle serpent or a roaring lion that desires to destroy us. The staff is also used for guiding sheep. Again and again, we see a shepherd use his staff to guide his sheep gently into a new path or through some gate or along dangerous, difficult routes. He does not use it to actually beat the beast. Rather, the tip of the long, slender stick is laid gently against the side of the animal, and the pressure applied guides the sheep in the way the shepherd wants to go. Thus, the sheep is reassured of his proper path. Just as the rod of God is emblematic of the Word of God, so the staff of God is symbolic of the Spirit of God. In Christ's dealings with us, individuals, there is the essence of the sweetness, the comfort and consolation, the gentle correction brought through the work of his gracious Spirit. Our next name for Jehovah that we can relate to this passage is Jehovah Nissi, the Lord my victory. You prepare a table before me. In some of the finest sheep countries in the world, the high plateaus of sheep ranges are always referred to as mesas, the Spanish and Swahili word for tables. In fact, the use of this word is not uncommon in referring to the high, flat-top plateaus of Africa or other continents. So it may be seen that when David referred to as a table was actually the entire high range where sheep would graze in summer. Early in the season, even before all the snow has been melted by spring sunshine, the shepherd would go ahead and make preliminary survey trips to this rough, wild country. He would look it over with great care, keeping ever in mind its best use for his flock during the coming season. Then, just before the sheep arrive, he will make another expedition to prepare the tableland for them. The careful shepherd would also decide well ahead of time where his camps would be located so the sheep would have best bed grounds. He goes over the range carefully to determine how vigorous the grass and vegetation is. At this time, he decides whether some slopes and basins can be used only lightly, whereas other slopes and meadows may graze more heavily. He does not remove the natural predators of the sheep, like wolves or cougars, but he has prepared a table for the sheep in the midst of their enemies. Without departing from the previous picture of the shadow of the valley of death, David envisioned the provision and goodness given by the Lord as a host, inviting David to a rich, lavish table prepared for him. Adam Clarke writes, here the second allegory begins. A magnificent banquet is provided by a most liberal and benevolent host, who is not only a bounty to feed me, but power to protect me. And though surrounded by my enemies, I sit down to this table with confidence, knowing that I shall feast in perfect security. David gives a beautiful picture. Table suggests bounty. Prepare suggests foresight and care. Before me suggests personal connection. In the presence of my enemies. This is a striking phrase. The goodness and care suggested by the prepared table is set in the midst of the presence of my enemies. The host's care and concern does not eliminate the presence of my enemies, but enables the experience of God's goodness and bounty even in their midst. You anoint my head, my cup runneth over. In the Old Testament, when it was declared that a sacrificial lamb should be without blemish, the thought uppermost in the writer's mind was that the animal should be free of scab, a disease of the sheep. In a very real and direct sense, scab is a significant contamination of sin and evil. The only effective antidote is to apply linseed oil, sulfur, and other chemicals that can control the disease. In many sheep-rearing countries, dips are built and the flock is put through the dip. Each animal is completely submerged in a solution until the entire body is soaked. The most difficult part to do is the head. The head has to be plunged under repeatedly to ensure the scab has been controlled. Despite the dangers about the presence of enemies, David enjoyed the richness of his host's goodness. He's refreshed by his head anointed with oil. His cup was overfilled. Spurgeon asked, Beloved, I ask you now a question. How would it be with you if God had filled your cup in proportion to your faith? How much would you have had in your cup? John Trapp challenged us by saying, those that have this happiness must carry their cup upright and see that it overflows into their poor brethren's emptier vessels. The next one we look at in the name of Jehovah is Jehovah Jireh, the Lord my provider. Surely goodness and mercy shall follow me all the days of my life. The host's care brought the goodness and mercy of God to David, and he lived in the faithful expectation of it continuing all the days of his life. Derek Kidner describes it this way. Mercy is the covenant word rendered steadfast love elsewhere. Together with goodness, it suggests the steady kindness and support that one can count on in the family or between firm friends. Heinrich Meyer further describes it, we are all escorted with a shepherd in front and these twin angels behind. Spurgeon adds, these twin guardian angels will always be with me at my back and my beck. Just as when great princes go ahead, they must not go unattended, so it is with the believer. And I will dwell in the house of the Lord forever. The psalm ends with the calmest assurance that David would enjoy the presence of the Lord forever, both in his days on earth and eternity. Derek Kidner says, in the Old Testament world, to eat and drink at someone's table created a bond of mutual loyalty and could be the culminated a token of a covenant. So to be God's guest is to be more than an acquaintance. Invited for a day, it is to live with him forever. So I ask this one simple question. Is the Lord your shepherd? He is the good shepherd, the provider of our needs, our security, and our eternity. Well, Bill will now come up and we'll sing a song, and then after that, we'll take communion. Thank you.
So this song is an invitation kind of to do what the song says, which is turn our eyes upon Jesus as we prepare to meet with him around the table.